So when we talk about what is anti-Semitism, it's Black Hebrew Israelites this weekend. What, today's Monday? Tuesday.
Wednesday.
It's going to air on Wednesday.
Okay, sorry. So it is over this past weekend in Staten Island on Sunday, a Jewish man who he must have been Orthodox because you could identify that he was Jewish, and his son were shot by a young man with a pellet gun as they came out of
BB guns. I did see that, yeah.
And so when he was asked by the police, they said it was a hate crime. He said, how could it be a hate crime if I'm a Hebrew?
And now for the truth. This is the picture of the man arrested and charged for the crime of which Jonathan Greenblatt implies was committed by a black man, a Black Hebrew Israelite man. However, the person who committed the crime is called Jason Kish, which is a Jewish name, who is a white Caucasian male. You see, Jonathan Greenblatt's and the ADL's practice of making accusations against so-called Negroes goes back many, many years. In fact, the ADL was founded when the courts failed to convict a black man instead of convicting Ashkenazi Jew Leo Franks. And with that, let's take a closer look.
So with all that said, there's a range of practice and observance. So there are plenty of black Jews who go to what you might call traditional Jewish synagogue. Then there are other communities like the Black Hebrew Israelites. Now, there's a range of practice even among Black Hebrew Israelites. You know, there's a large community of them in Israel who identify as Jewish in a traditional way. And then you have the guys in Times Square who observe in a way that's not so traditional, I would say.
They would say y'all aren't Jews. It would say that, what they say, white people are not the original Jews, basically.
Correct.
Yeah.
And look, they're entitled to their beliefs until that justifies shooting Jewish people with pellet guns on Staten Island. Or like, this is December. 3 years ago, December 2019, 2 Black Hebrew Israelites went into a kosher supermarket in Jersey City and killed 3 people because they said they weren't real Jews.
Wow.
Shot them cold dead in a kosher supermarket.
There has been considerable reporting that these 2 suspects are linked to the Black Hebrew Israelite movement. We have evidence that both suspects expressed interest in this group, but we have not definitively established any formal links to that organization or to any other group. Based on the available evidence, we believe that the 2 shooters were acting on their own.
So again, you're entitled to believe whatever you want, but I think we need to recognize that rhetoric can have real world consequences.
Sorry, I had my mute button on there. Let's try it again. Shalom, shalom, Israel. Hopefully everybody's doing well. Shalom to everybody in the chat, that everybody dialed in. If you could, please just give me a 1 in the chat if my audio sounds okay. I saw one comment that is buffering. Hopefully it's not buffering. It might be a local phenomenon. So if you could please just put a 1 in the chat if the audio sounds okay. Hopefully I don't have to restart the live. Okay, thank you. So sounds like the audio is good. All right, fam. Well, we're going to talk a little bit about just the Black Holocaust. But before we do that, I did want to just touch on just one or two things. And thank you everyone for responding in the chat. But I just wanted to respond to, some of the lies that's being put out by Jonathan Greenblatt. And that's who you saw in the interview on The Breakfast Club. Now, people may not catch this, especially if you're not familiar with the history of the early 1900s, as to why what he's doing is very, very dangerous. And for that, I'd like to share something from the NAACP, because the NAACP, that organization, has been around for a long time, and they've seen their fair share of tragedy, of massacres, of lynchings, and all this stuff, right? So I want us to look at what the NAACP has to say about what the catalyst for a lot of the death and destruction and the lynchings within the Black community. So let's read about that. It reads, hopefully you can see that on the screen as well. But it reads, allegations behind lynchings. And it says, white mobs often used dubious criminal accusations to justify lynchings. A common claim used to lynch Black men was perceived sexual transgressions against white women. Charges of rape were routinely fabricated. These allegations were used to enforce segregation and advance stereotypes of Black men as violent, hypersexual aggressors. Hundreds of Black people were lynched based on accusations of other crimes, including murder, arson, robbery, and vagrancies. So basically, fam, when you look back in history and you look at Black Wall Street, and actually we're going to read that in this next slide. But what was the prelude to that were trumped up charges or false accusations against the Black community, right? To rile up the base, so to speak. That's why when we see Jonathan Greenblatt peddle in these false accusations, particularly against the so-called, I'm using their term, right, so-called Black Israelite community, he's executing the same protocols that ended up getting a lot of Black folks lynched in the early 1900s. This is why it's very, very dangerous, and that we need to address it, and that we definitely need to write into the Breakfast Club to let them know that this guy was on their program, giving false statements about, like I said, I hate to use their term but it's about Israelites, right? We can just say Israelites. But let's keep going, fam. I want to show you the next slide here. Hang on a second. And let's read about Black Wall Street. All right, so let's read about what was the catalyst for Black Wall Street. It says, a lynch mob formed in downtown Tulsa after a 19-year-old Black man was accused of assaulting a white woman. So over and over again, when we look through the annals of history, we see that the ignition, the match to the tinder, is always an accusation made against a Black man, right? Sometimes it's against a white woman, that sort of thing. But there's always some sort of accusation that's levied that incites the mob. This is what we see that's going on, fam. Let's read about another one. This is about the massacre that occurred in Washington, D.C. in 1919. Now, not a lot of folks are familiar with this as they are with Black Wall Street, but this one was also a massacre that resulted in lots of Black folks getting killed. But let's read about it. It says, Washington, D.C., 1919. For weeks, police and the press, including the Washington Post, whipped up hysteria over an alleged Negro fiend attacking white women. Are you seeing the pattern, fam? It says things boiled over in July 19th, 1919, with white posses hunting Black men. Right? Always, fam. The accusations come first. So I just want us to make sure that we're picking up on this pattern, this dangerous pattern that Jonathan Greenblatt is peddling in, right? And most high willing, we will go into, a little bit more of this in a later video. But there is a history of the ADL, doing just what they're doing right now. I mean, they have a long history of engaging in this stuff. But with that being said, so let's set that aside just for a moment, and let's shift gears a little bit, and let's get over to the Black Holocaust. So as you probably already heard about, Whoopi Goldberg, stirring the pot again, saying that the Jews are not a race, and of course that resulted in like a firestorm of criticism, and you got folks popping up on TV talking about, oh, this is a lesson. Whoopi needs to go and learn some stuff, right? But the thing that I feel that most people are missing, and the reason why I wanted to share this video with you, is that the thing that people assume that people don't, or maybe folks don't know about, is that whenever people bring up the Holocaust, it's brought up as if it's just a white thing. You know what I'm saying? Like so, Black folks, we tend to bring up, the transatlantic slave trade, and then sometimes you have a Jewish person say, well, we had the Holocaust. So either or, right? Well, for Black folks that are Israel, that are under the Deuteronomy 28 curses, we know that wherever we went, it didn't matter what continent we were on, what year on the calendar it was, those curses was according to scripture, they were going to hunt us down and then kick into gear. And yes, there were Black folks in Germany. Yes, there were Black Israelites in Germany. And yes, the curses kicked on over there as well, which meant that when the Holocaust kicked in, guess who was caught up in it too? But not a lot of folks talk about it. Not a lot of people know about it. But yes, the Holocaust included us too. So whenever you hear people, try to compare things like, hey, well, we were in it too with the Holocaust. Well, for so-called Black people, it's not either or, it's and. You know what I mean? It's like it's the transatlantic slave trade and the Holocaust and the Saharan slave trade and the Inquisition and the persecution all the persecutions that happened over in Europe, like all over, fam, all over. So with that being said, let's take a look at this this information. All right. So I see Peter Piper saying it's buffering. Is it buffering for anybody else? Yeah, just let me know in the chat, fam, if it's buffering for you. It might be a local phenomena for you, Peter. So, all right, okay. All right, so looks like we're okay for others. All right, so let me keep going. All right, thank you, fam. So Germany's Black Holocaust. All right, so to put this into perspective, I kind of want us to understand that when it came to Hitler, like Hitler was the quintessential white supremacist. And if you throw a Black person in the mix, guess what? Hitler really didn't like Black folks. Like if Hitler didn't like the Jews, he really didn't like Negroes in Germany. And for that, to prove that point, let's read this quote. It says, on July 20th, 1939, months before the start of World War II, Fischer indicated something about Nazi racial attitudes when he stated, I do not categorize every Jew as inferior, as I do Negroes. And I do not underestimate the greatest enemy with whom we have to fight. Come on, fam. Hitler did not like Black folks, right? He did not. We were at the bottom of the food chain when it came to Hitler's. Yeah, fam. If you see any trolls in the if you see any trolls in the chat, feel free to put the kibosh on that. I know Ema's sister Saul is really good at that. So, all right, let's keep going. Yeah, don't want this to be a long lesson. So let's keep it moving, fam. All right, but let's keep going. Remember what we're saying. The point that we're trying to drive home is that Hitler did not like Negroes. He did not like Black folks. He was all about this purist, the white supremacy. And Negroes were a wrench in his plans. And so for that, let's read our next reference. And it says, though there were relatively few Blacks in Germany, and that is actually a questionable statement because, according to history, according to archaeology, according to science, DNA, we do know that at some point Germany had a sizable black population. Over time, the white population replaced them. But that's a video and a lesson for a different day. Like, that's an established fact that not a lot of folks know about. But for now, let's just keep it moving. Let me start over. It says, though there were relatively few blacks in Germany. Hitler discriminated between black and white prisoners of war. So now we're going to talk about World War II. So you have the Holocaust, of course. You have World War II, and then what we're also going to talk about is the period of time, like just before both of those things, right? Black folks were getting persecuted. It's like we couldn't win for losing, right? But it says Hitler discriminated between black and white prisoners of war. So if you think about like the Red Tails, the Tuskegee, not the Tuskegee the Tuskegee Airmen, right? Like if they got shot down over Germany, let's read about what happened to them. It says, black soldiers were captured during World War II, were separated from their units and shot. Family, they weren't playing around with black folks in Germany. I'm telling you, so-called black folks had it worse. They had it worse. It's because of those curses, fam. Let's keep going. It says, he reported that in the vicinity of Stargard, Germany, there was a Negro prisoner of war camp where medical experiments had been performed on these POWs. Wow. So hopefully that should sound familiar, family. Let me move my icon out the way. Let's keep going. It says, Fischer performed such tests on gypsies and scheduled similar tests for Jewish inmates at, I'm not even pronouncing that word. Grauwitz also reported that a Dr. Hornig, another SS or Secret Service physician, had performed tests. Can't read that. I have an icon over my screen here. On Negro prisoners of war in France. Also, ran similar tests and experiments seemingly involved studying blacks to learn how whites could better adapt to the tropical environments. So basically, fam, just know that they were running experiments on black folks in Germany, right? Because a lot, that's, like I said, whenever people bring up, hey, they were running experiments on us in Germany, black folks aren't included in that. But yes, black people were included in that. Okay, well, let's keep reading. Let's keep going, fam. So this is an article from the BBC. And it says, being black in Germany. And this is, I believe this is focusing mainly on the mixed children, because you had a couple of different groups. You had the unmixed Negroes in Germany, but then you had the mixed children where you had, when the Africans or Negroes ended up mixing with the white German population, then we had these mixed communities, and Hitler had a special name for these mixed communities. Hitler referred to them as the Rhineland bastards. And let's see, I believe I have a slide on this, but what you need to understand is that even with the children of these mixed couples, these mixed races, Hitler, they enacted a plan to exterminate them. And he had two approaches, either sterilize them or euthanize them. Children, family. And in either case, if they chose to sterilize them, they would take the children, the SS would show up at the residence of the home. They would take the children and they would take them off and they would sterilize them without any anesthesia. Right. This would be open operations. So just to give you an idea. So let's keep going. And it says, in the Nazi era from 1933 to 1945, African Germans numbered in their thousands. There was no uniform experience, but over time they were banned from having relationships with white people, excluded from education and different types of employment. And some were sterilized while others were taken to concentration camps. And that's where they disappeared. These are just some of the pictures, right? Just some of the mixed children, right? And as you can see, this is what Hitler would refer to those children as. It says, the Rhineland bastards were the offspring of German mothers and French colonial African troops, because the African troops were there at some point as well, but there was also an established black population in Germany as well. But this one says troops who had occupied the Rhineland after World War One were also persecuted by the Nazis, right? By the Nazis. But let's keep going. So just know, fam, like I said, the big takeaway here is that the Holocaust is not a white only event, right? We being Israel, we were there too. We were getting persecuted too, all right? So I'm going to drop down to the second highlighted line where it says, he says, evidence shows their policy towards other racial aliens hinted towards a goal of racial annihilation. Hitler did not like black folks, fam. And it says, in 1935, the Nuremberg laws, which among other things outlawed marriages between Jews and other Germans, were passed. These were then amended to include black people and Roma in the same category as Jews. But a fear of racial mixing persisted in 1937. The mixed race children from the Rhineland were targeted for forced sterilization. Right. All right. And this is just another slide. Let me advance past this one. So this comes from the Daily Mail. And like I said, there was persecutions during different times, right, on our timeline. So there's persecutions during the Holocaust, persecutions. We got, World War II, POWs being shot down and taken for POWs. And while the white POWs were taken to the POW camps, the black POWs were taken around back and shot. All right. But now we're going to talk about the time before the Holocaust. And let's learn about what happened before the Holocaust in Germany. So it says Hitler's Holocaust blueprint. A new book reveals how the Khazars, Germany, used concentration camps in Africa to advance their theories of racial supremacy. So yes, the concentration camps were first in Africa. First in Africa. Africa first. But let's keep going. All right, so that's a shot. So remember, when you look at the pictures of the concentration camps, you see the emaciated, starving people that had, experiments performed on them. This is where that was, where people say the blueprint was refined, and that's in Africa. It's in Africa. Let's keep reading. And it says, African concentration camps. What happened to others of those who survived or escaped brutal murders? The survivor says Sims, were imprisoned in concentration camps or used as guinea pigs for medical experiments. So there you go, fam. In Africa, used for medical experiments. It says a foretaste of things to come. Dropping down, it says, remarkably, decades before the Jews suffered as human guinea pigs in German concentration camps in Europe, Black Africans had suffered the same fate at the diabolical hands of men like Fisher, who had no qualms of conscience in denying his alleged loyalty to the Hippocratic Oath. It says the files of the Imperial Colonial Office reveal that the official policy of the German government was to deport and destroy Nama until the mid-1906. And we have the African tribes. Bathani, which is the second African tribe there, says people were held in concentration camps at Windhoek and Caribbean. Yes, before there were horrifying pictures forever etched into our minds of Jews who were reduced to skin and bones, there were extremely disturbing, next slide, pictures of Black Africans whose diseased skin barely covered fragile rib cages and encased a frail overall skeletal structure. So family, this was in Africa first. This was against Africans first. So when folks try to make this thing to be an exclusive white Ashkenazi Jew experience, it is not, fam. It's not. All right. And let's see here. Let's read this one. It says, let me skip this one. It said, what was Germany's Black population? It says, apparently, No one knows for sure how many blacks were in Germany during World War II. Let me read that again. Apparently, no one knows for sure how many blacks were in Germany during World War II. Nevertheless, fairly educated guesses abound. So whenever you hear numbers and estimates about blacks in Germany, it is always an estimate, fam. It's always an estimate. It could be high or it could be lower than the actual estimate. But let's keep reading. It says, unfortunately, a black man in Germany was like a black man in the United States. Let's say that again, fam. A black man in Germany was like a black man in the United States. Man. Of which famed author Ralph Ellison wrote a book appropriately titled The Invisible Man. There you go, fam. Like I said, the curses of Deuteronomy 28, they followed us wherever we went. All right, let's read this one. Let's see. Actually, we might skip this one as well because it says, and of course, there are in a few cases actual court records that verify the existence of black victims of the Holocaust. Right. So we do have court records in that regard. And it says the Germans committed the first genocide of the 20th century in German Southwest Africa between 1904 and 1907. And it says the genocide in German Southwest Africa is significant as a prelude to the Holocaust. It cannot be denied that there are actual structural similarities. The common factor is the readiness to exterminate certain groups of human beings. And it reads, a genocide through the term had not, or it says a genocide, though the term had not yet been invented, was committed. Listen, fam, it says 80% of the hero people and 50% of the Nama people perished or were murdered. So 80. So when Germany came into Africa, 80%, fam, of these people were wiped out, and you have 50% in this other tribe. This was in Africa first, fam. I just want to stress that this was in Africa first. So with that being said, fam, like the points taken here is that, remember, there were different, periods of time over in Germany. And so we have of course, we have the Holocaust. We have, of course, the POWs of World War II. And we also have the time, just before any of that started over in Africa. We have concentration camps. We have medical, experimentation on the populace, and we have genocide, all by, the same Germans that then took that model and then implemented it in Germany. And yes, we were over in Germany when that was implemented as well. So the Holocaust is not just a white experience. Black folks were there too. All right, fam. Well, that's actually all I have for you tonight. Thank you, everybody, for joining. Shout out to everybody that's in the chat. Love you, fam. Stay tuned. Like I said, still putting in that in the work for the next video coming out. Really hope to get into a lot of the history of some of these organizations that are coming against our community. And I think, like I said, I think you'll be shocked as far as who they really are and where they come from. And their history is undeniable. They just don't talk about it. All right, fam. All right, fam. Well, hey, stay blessed. Thank you for joining. Shout out to everybody. Like I said, shout out to everybody in the chat, and stay blessed, Israel. Love you, fam, and shalom.